Anger management. Is that the key word for the day?
It might be, yeah.
Look at that. Oh my face hurts. My brain hurts. My face hurts. They all hurt.
You know,
What
amongst
happened, Cormac?
amongst all of the other things that happened today, work wise and everything else, we have our water line, both the water main along the main road and the feeds into the neighborhood are all being replaced. So obviously they've
Sweet.
got to replace all of the taps within every part of from the feed into the neighborhood to each of the houses. And so they
Okay.
put this they put this little note on there that says, well, first of all, they said that there was going to be some sewer line work coming soon. Not water line work. Sewer line. So, we're like, okay. And they
Most
said
people don't know the difference.
and then they said that this work wasn't going to be till like mid-October or late October. I think it started like the week of like the 19th or something like that. 16th is when week of the 16th is when it was supposed to start. So, okay, fine. And then they start to mobilize and they start doing this work and they start, like marking all of the different utilities. So, we've got marks for sewer, for water, for gas, and so on and so forth. And then they, are running power, like any of the power that's underground or whatever. Okay, fine. We're improving the infrastructure, right? Great.
Mhm.
So the little note that they hang on your door handle that says what's going on. We need you to make sure that you don't park on the street, blah, 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 and all this other stuff. Well, then they
Unless you want your car tagged. If you want your car tagged with the neon paint, then it's okay.
Well, then they say, well, it's just this minor inconvenience. It'll be a minor inconvenience. Let me just tell you
If
right
we
now,
don't
brother.
say so. If we say so ourselves.
let me tell you what their minor inconvenience is. First of all,
Okay.
the 4-lane road is a 1-lane road. There's pipes and stuff like all up and down. Because we live on a court, there's one way in, and it kind of like loops around. So you can either come in one way or come in another way. Well, they've got one side completely blocked off. Okay. If you tell us in advance that you're going to block one of them off, then we'll make arrangements to go through the other road, right?
Sure. Right.
No.
No.
Because
Yeah. No.
all of the piping and all of the material and everything else is on blocking that side of the neighborhood. The other side is the backhoes, the dump trucks, let me just go ahead and set down this several ton chunk of concrete water, like new manhole structure and all this other stuff. And hope that at 7:00 in the morning when we're starting all of this work, it's not going to be too much of an inconvenience when everybody in the neighborhood actually wants to leave or take their kids to school or whatever.
Right.
So then they're like, okay, we're going to be doing pipe bursting. So there should be like no real inconvenience to no real disturbance. Okay. That sounds great. Pipe bursting is awesome, and so there shouldn't be any disturbances. So please tell me why I have a 10-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot deep hole in my front yard.
What?
Wait, my neighbor who just replaced his yard, pristine yard, it's beautiful. He dug it out himself. He leveled it. He put in new irrigation system, re-sodded and seeded the whole thing. It's now been in for a while and it's rooted and it looks beautiful. Sorry, let me change that. It looked beautiful.
Oh no.
Because the 10 by 12 by 12 foot deep hole that I had, he's got 2.
Wow. For what? What do they need to
Oh,
do that
also
for?
he also has the luxury of being the house that was chosen to host the porta john.
Oh,
I mean,
that's what those pits are for. Those are
yeah.
pit toilets.
So the
Yeah.
neighbor next to me, not only is there minor disturbances, 3 holes. Now they have the front of their apron of their driveway to the road, probably about 3 sidewalks deep. Let's just call it 15 feet from the road to 15 feet into their property. They don't have their driveway anymore.
Wow. It'll
That
all get
was
put back exactly as it was.
exactly. And this was a
Right?
new this
Exactly.
they just paid for a new driveway too.
Wow.
And they've got
See, this is
and
the
they've got
thing
the
that
three
scares
holes.
me about the East Coast because everything is so old on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Everything is
Yeah.
so old. And it's like one problem leads to another. I remember before I moved out of Southern California, they put new water lines in, not sewer lines, but water lines
Yeah.
into the whole neighborhood. And it took them a couple months to do it, but they didn't have to dig a trench the whole way. They have you seen these things where they do it like remotely, where
Yeah.
they can like punch these holes and
Yeah.
connect it without digging a whole trench. It's
Well,
pretty
so
crazy stuff.
that's essentially what they did here, except for the holes were just a minor inconvenience. It just
Just
small minor
just for
inconvenience.
just a mass grave is what it
Yeah,
sounds like.
exactly.
Jeez.
And,
Wow.
and it's all so they did one side of at least the first half of the loop of our street, and now they're starting to do the other side. So of course you don't worry, it's just a minor inconvenience when
Hmm.
this really large dump truck is blocking you from getting out of your
Right.
driveway.
Right.
And when let's just, I'll give you an example. Let's say you have to go and pick up your daughter from school to take her to a doctor's appointment. And you know that, well, I should probably leave a little bit early because it's probably going to take a little while just to get out of my yard. And so I walk down there. Oh, wait, sorry. This is hypothetical. This person walks down there and walks up to the crew and says, hey, I need to get to a doctor's appointment. Can you guys move out of the way just real quick? Let me get out. You can, get back in. Just got to get out of, I just need to get out of the thing. And I can't go around them because there's
somebody can't get around.
That's right. Somebody can't get around them because there's hypothetically a 10-foot by 12-foot by 12-foot deep hole between the front of their truck and so then they go to the driver and say, hey, we need to let this guy out. And the driver looks at this hypothetical person and says, F him.
Thou shalt not pass.
That hypothetical person looks at her like, really? This is
What?
This is how the day's gonna go? It's like just simply asking you to like move out of the way so I can go to a doctor's appointment. And
nope.
This
Oh my
seriously?
God.
It was
wow.
It took me 15 minutes to
hypothetically a very dark day.
Yeah, we'll just admit to it being my joy of the day, and so yeah,
no
it
one
was
caught that. Yeah,
it was something special, and I was just like, I don't get it. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Bummer.
Yeah. So it was fun. It was fun. Yeah. And one last thing. So where they're stockpiling all of the pipes happens to be in front. So there is a very well known and has been a long standing tradition within this neighborhood. And so I just learned about it, obviously, only being here now a year. There's this family that owns 2 properties and they've got a couple of like garages. So they have this thing called the Haunted Garage Productions. And what they do is they do this really, really big haunted house. And it opens up on the 6th of October, which is in a couple of days.
Not this year. Yeah.
And
Oh,
where all of this stuff is literally stockpiled in front of the entrance into this awesome neighborhood haunted house
of
thing.
course. Yeah.
And I just look at them every time I go by, and I'm just like, these poor people. They're just like,
Yeah.
this is this is something fun. This is like, I mean, and I will say that there's thousands of people who go to this thing all the time. I mean, yeah. And I can't even make eye contact to my neighbor who did all of this work on his lawn. And he now has basically, these big, massive graves dug in his front yard. And
Right.
oh, and they didn't bother to check to see if there was a irrigation system, just assuming, probably not, but he had one in. I sat around chatting with him while he was installing it. Yeah, they dug that up too.
Well, yeah. It's in,
So,
of course.
so yeah.
Sounds like a comedy of errors. Is this a governmental agency or is it private? Did they hire a private company to do this work? Do you know?
They hired a private contractor to do the city's,
Yeah.
water main replacements.
Yeah.
So
Big
yeah.
fat contract. Wow.
Yeah.
Major bummer.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Well, maybe before we talk about, let's lighten the mood a little bit. We'll do a little bit of follow up here, and to a previous conversation, and then we can get back into the serious stuff, the real architectural. What would you call this? This is like an emo episode. It's going to be very dark at some points. I don't know. Maybe that's not the right term. I don't know. I'm old. All right. I'm going to share. I'm going to do a little follow up here and share my my screen. So I'll do enough talking about this to entice our listening audience to check out this episode over on YouTube. But I don't want to leave all this in the audio episode, right? So we'll edit it out because I'm going to be pointing at visuals here. So if this is just I just want to give a fair warning. I'm going to share some images. I'm going to share some stuff that I participated in that we talked about in a prior episode where I rode around the rim of Crater Lake, and I want to show some pictures and kind of some graphs and maps and stuff. And we won't leave all that in the audio only episode, but we will have that in the video episode. So if that gives you, if you're intrigued about that, you might want to go out and check that out, but it'll be cut out of the audio part. So I'm going to share this.
Yeah. So yes, we understand that there's going to be a audio and visual component to this. And
right.
If you'd like to see the visual component, it doesn't mean meet us down at the local Mexican cantina for some margaritas.
For the slideshow.
Because, again, yeah.
Right. All right. So I'm going to start here.
Lighting the Rim was not
the margarita bar that you had hoped for. Right.
Yeah.
All you can drink margarita bar. Sorry to disappoint. This is, I just want to start off here because I'm doing like a presentation. This is where we're going in new directions with Archispeak, right? We've added the YouTube channel. We've got a visual component. We want to start taking advantage of that. It doesn't mean everything's going to be over there and not on audio, but in this case, visual makes the most sense. So I wanted to start zoomed out here because I thought this was cool. This is just a map of the United States and shows, I think in this case, I'm filtering by hiking trails. And I just thought this was kind of cool because you can see like where the main trails are. It's like there's not very many trails in the middle of the U.S., right? It's
No.
So we're very blessed here on the West Coast. The East Coast is also very blessed, and if you look at the distribution, I guess we've got the Sierras and the Cascades on the west. We've got the Rocky Mountains kind of almost central. Obviously, that's in central time zone, so central. And then we've got the East Coast, the Appalachian Trail that kind of runs from looks like Alabama to Maine, right? I've never been on it, so I'm not familiar with it. But
The actual start and stop is from Georgia to Maine. There are a few
Georgia.
little offshoots here and there, but yeah, it starts in Georgia, ends in Maine, or starts in Maine and ends in Georgia, whichever
Whichever
direction you're
direction you want
going.
to go.
We'll
Yeah,
hike through.
so I mean that is a long trail right there, and so I'm drawing on the screen
Yeah,
just to show this stuff. Um, so we've got the Appalachian Trail, we've got the Continental Divide Trail, which I just thought was super cool. Goes from
yeah,
Canada to Mexico down through the Rockies, and people mountain bike that one. And then on the west coast, we've got the Pacific Crest Trail, which comes up through California, Oregon, and Washington, and goes basically from the Mexican border to the Canadian border. And that's the direction most people go. Whereas I think the Continental Divide Trail, maybe at least the biking stuff that I've seen, they go north to south. Pacific Crest Trail, you don't want to end in Mexico, because it's in Tijuana. You're hiking on like highways in Southern California for some of that. It's really terrible, I think. So
hmm.
you want to end up where it's beautiful. You want to end up on the Canadian border, I think. So um, anyway, I just thought that was kind of
Oh,
a cool place to start this conversation, because the Pacific Crest Trail goes right by the location.
well, we'll say what's interesting, and I'm assuming that it's also very similar for the Pacific Crest Trail, is that depending on the time of year, if you're a through hiker, I've spoken with many a through hiker on the Appalachian Trail, and
Mm-hmm.
depending on the time of year you start is also depending on like which direction you're going. If you
That makes
start
sense.
in
Yeah.
Maine, you're kind of hoping that because if you start in like Alabama and you walk to Maine and you walk to Maine in the wintertime, not a good decision.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. Yeah. All right. So let's see. If I just zoom in here onto Southern Oregon, you can get an idea of jump over to a better map. So this is the actual Crater Lake National Park, and this is where we come in through the south entrance from our location, but there's also a north entrance. So you can see that the highway kind of skims the western edge of the crater. And if you zoom in here, you can see how much topography there is at the edge of the crater. So you kind of drive all the way up to the rim, and then you're kind of, going around the circumference of Crater Lake for the most part. And you're looking down into a hole. And there's this island out in the middle called Wizard Island. And on Wizard Island, you can kind of see the topography lines there. That's the actual center of the cinder cone of the volcano right there. So it's not right in the
Hmm.
middle of the crater. It's kind of off to the western edge. And you can do a boat ride, and you can hike that trail up to the top. It's a little summit trail that goes from where you get dropped
That's
off on the
cool.
boat up to the top. Yeah. So you actually can get to it. And I think most people don't know that you can do a boat tour of the lake, and it is operated by the national park. They actually fly the boats in with helicopters when they drop a new boat off, which I guess they even did
Nice.
recently. There's a couple different tours that you can do of the lake, one that drops you off on the island and one that doesn't. And they've also put submarines in this lake. And anyway, it's pretty cool. All of those have to be delivered by helicopter, because there's no road that goes down to the water. And there is a
No boat ramp.
trail. There's no boat ramp. Yeah. So there's a trail on the northern edge here that I've hiked before, and that will take you down. It's almost 2 miles down to the edge of the water. That's where you catch the boat to go do one of those tours.
What's the drop there?
It's almost 900 feet at that trailhead. So it's kind of, there's a
Wow.
lot of different elevation gains and drops
That's not
around the
bad.
edge. But at that point, yeah. So over 2 miles, it's a steep hike, but I would say it's it's not a strenuous hike. It's just kind of medium, and it's a wide trail. It's meant for a lot of people. So that's kind of cool, as far as like just giving you an overview of the lake, and you can kind of get an idea of how much topography there is. And then this is the actual ride that I did myself. So it's 32, almost 33 miles around the entire lake, and you can see that it gets kind of close to the lake and far away from the lake. We'll go to that map here in a second, but a little over 2.5 hours of moving time. It was about 3.5 hours of total time right down there. You can see that, and 3,500 feet of elevation gain throughout the entire thing. So it was actually the same elevation gain and loss because we started and ended at the same location, right? So 3,500 feet of climbing, also 3,500 feet of descending. And if I scroll down here, you can kind of see a cross section of elevation as we did the ride. So the climbs and the descents were kind of evenly distributed. The lake, and we did this stupid thing where when we were driving in, we saw people riding down the hill that we were driving up to go up to the top of the lake, where we just thought everybody starts at the top of the lake, and we're like wondering why. Oh, were they already done or what? And it just turns out that they were smarter than us. They started at the bottom of the hill and did their climb first. We started at halfway up the hill, and so we had to do 3 miles of climbing at the very end just to finish our 33-mile ride, which was the worst place.
Yeah, because that makes sense. I mean,
yeah. Well, that's what an architect would do.
After almost 36 miles of riding, and that's what you wanted to do, is do a hill climb at the very
at the end. Yeah, when you're the freshest,
and I was looking
you're the most warmed up, I guess, at that point. So.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, that was it. It was just like the 34 miles was just the warm up for the
an easy warm up
crush of a climb.
Totally.
Yeah, I mean, because looking at your time, I mean, you were doing a pretty decent clip of time.
Right. I think it's pretty standard. They said anywhere between 3 and 5 hours to do it, and so for us, it was 3.5 hours of time. But
for me, I'm pretty positive it would be closer to the 5 plus.
And actually, if I did it again, I would take longer because I would enjoy it more. I think this first time it was like, we don't know what it's going to be like, so let's go for it. And it's not like we were racing, but at the same time, other people are waiting for us at the end. It wasn't just us kind of hanging out to do our own thing. There were other people kind of reliant on our schedule. You never know if you're going to have a breakdown or a mechanical issue or a flat tire or any of those things. So it does stop at 6 p.m. They take away all the snacks at 6 p.m. at all the stations around the lake. And so it's like you want to be done before that happens. Otherwise, you're going to start risking various things. So.
Wait, they take away the snacks?
They take away the snacks at 6. The volunteers go home at 6. Yes.
And this is something that they close the roads off, free of cars, or at least a good portion of it, right?
So so basically there's that entry road that comes in from the south, right? And then there's that other entry road that comes in from the north. And that connection road there between the north and the south entry, they don't close that side, because if somebody comes in one way and they want to get out the other way, they're not going to make them drive 4 hours around that, right? So our first portion of the ride was about 8 miles with cars, not too many cars, but it was probably a pretty busy weekend at the park because of the ride. They do this 2 weekends a year. And basically the idea is they close down the other 24 miles around the eastern edge of the crater to cars so that cyclists can enjoy it car free. And so when you finally get to that northern entrance up there, you're car free for the rest of the way around. And that's what makes it really, really a special thing, because you're not concerned for your safety the entire time, which you totally would be, because think about it. Like when you're at a national park, drivers are driving around. They are not watching the road. They're looking around. They're looking at the view. They're looking at everything else that's going on. I can't even imagine riding this on a normal weekend traffic kind of a situation. So, it was great to have 24 miles of the 33 miles completely car free as we went around that eastern rim.
That's amazing. And I know that I see you logged in a couple of photos.
Yeah. Yep. So let me close this down.
What is this app you're using by chance?
This app is called Strava, and this is where a lot of athletes and cyclists kind of track all their tracks. So if you go running, trail running, if you go
Okay.
cycling somewhere, you're recording that with the GPS. You could be using the Strava app on your phone. You could be using a watch. You could be using another Garmin device, or, several different companies make devices. And then it synchronizes up to Strava so that over the year you get like total tallies of how many days you went riding, how many miles you rode, how much elevation gain you did. And it's kind of a nice way to just at the end of the year or over
That's cool.
time, people do it multiple years. So you can really start to get an idea of what's going on with your training or your cycling. So yeah, so I'm going to share some photos now. And these are photos of when we were starting the ride. This is a photo when we started. You can see the lake in the background. It kind of had some smoke in it. Have been wildfires in the area. And so I did this with my daughter-in-law, and we had a great time. I mean, we kind of split back and forth between two different kinds of bikes. One of the bikes was more of a urban, cruiser bike, and the other one was more of a actual road bike. And so the road bike, you have to hunch over, you're kind of like, it's got drop handlebars on it. And so you're in a different posture. The gearing is different, stuff like that. So we kind of swapped back and forth between those, but we were happy when we started. Along the way, this is kind of a cool shot of Mount Adams off in the distance, and it's kind of poking up through it's not clouds, it's actually smoke from the wildfires. But this is from kind of the northern rim looking north out over the plains of kind of eastern Oregon.
Has that nice misty kind of Ansel Adams type feel to it, but
yeah. It's not
no
that Adams. It's
huh?
Yeah, and this is named after the president, not the photographer. There's several volcanoes up the West Coast that are very standalone like this, and I think that it's really incredible to kind of watch them as you fly. If you were to fly from Southern California to Seattle, you would just see them all along the way. And that's pretty cool to have these kind of standalone mountains, which is very different than what I'm used to in Southern California, where all the mountains are kind of together. So Mount Whitney being the tallest peak in the Western Hemisphere, you can't even tell where it is because it's just mixed into the other Sierra Nevada mountains, right? So you can't really see it, but these mountains are very standalone. There's like Mount McLaughlin, Mount Adams, Mount Jefferson, Mount Bachelor, Mount Hood, all the way up through, Mount Baker. What's the big one in Washington? It's Mount Rainier, right? So that one's a huge one. Yeah. So they're all kind of, standalone, volcanic. They're very, very cool geology up here. And then you can just get an idea here of the glassiness of the lake. It was just like incredibly not only crystal clear, but crystal smooth as well, right? Polished. And it was beautiful way to start the day. It was a perfect day to do this ride.
Yeah, and I drive past, almost on a daily basis, our Lake St. Clair, that kind of divides the U.S. Detroit area with, the Windsor area in Canada. And 9 times out of 10, it's usually like really choppy and windy, and you see, it's like you see a lot of activity, and here this thing just looks like a sheet of glass. It looks like that architectural project that you cut all of the chipboard, you stack it all up, you make all the topos, you put in all of your thing, and then I don't know how you did it, but I just use like a copious amount of white glue, poured over time, and then didn't have access or even the mindset to do an epoxy thing. Mine was all just like built up white glue, and it dries up and it's nice and glassy, which looks like this. But that's an amazing shot, because I'm so used to our lake looking like you just put out to sea on the North Atlantic.
Yeah,
it's a nor'easter.
And those lakes are huge. I know the one you're talking about is not as big as the Great Lakes, like proper, but it's still huge, right? And so And you get a lot of wind. And here, this is sitting down below the lip
Yeah.
of the crater, right? And it is kind of protected. There's no inlets, there's no outlets, so you'll only get disturbed by weather. And there happened to be no weather on this day, so it was perfect
Which was,
mirror surface,
yeah.
basically
You just
from.
besmirch my Lake St. Clair
Yeah, it's
and
not very
call it
big.
not a Great Lake. Uh,
I said it's not one of
it's
the
a
proper Great Lakes. You can, yeah, you can add that to the feedback bin if you'd like.
I'll be the
Here's
first one to
a
give you feedback on that one there, sir.
feedback. Here's your feedback. Here's a kind of a panoramic shot of the lake on the way around, and this is halfway around where I wasn't feeling the pain yet, but you can see some areas have some
I
pretty
was going to say
serious
you still have a
cliffs.
smile.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's some pretty serious cliffs on different pieces of the coastline. And then this is the Phantom Shipwreck portion of the lake. And it's just this gorgeous kind of rock structure that's poking up out of the lake. And there's a separate trailhead that looks over that. But from certain distances, it does look like a ship sank when it like came, got too close to the ground or something. But it's these very sharp, jagged rocks sticking up out of the water right there. And it's pretty sweet little feature of Crater Lake National Park.
Just to let you know, my lakes have real shipwrecks.
Yeah,
We don't have to pretend.
you can actually get boats into those lakes. Yeah, not these ones. This
Just
is
ask the Edmund Fitzgerald.
famous Gordon Lightfoot song about that. This is the final kind of view when you get to the lodge at the very end of the ride, and it had cleared up nicely. There was very little wildfire smoke left by this time in the day, and a few wispy clouds, and you can see Wizard Island out there in this shot. So kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the actual cinder cone that's in the middle of the lake. And yeah, I was tired by the end. My cycling partner was still doing just fine with her youthful age.
Yeah, I was going to say, where was that last shot showing that you hit the ceiling, the wall, the whatever we want to call it, the pain?
The wall of pain. I actually did really well on this ride. I've been riding my bike for a few years now, but and I will definitely do this again. It wasn't one of those things where I'm not. I did it once and I'm done. I would, if weather is good, it's totally worth doing this ride. And it's now that I know even more what to expect, I would definitely do it again. All right, so that's it. I wanted to follow up because we had talked about doing that, and it's always fun to share a new adventure. So,
yeah,
that was cool.
Actually, it sounds fantastic.
Well, so speaking of adventures, you went recently to Architectural Nerd Conference. Yes?
The Architectural Nerd Conference. I believe what you're referring to is a day-long seminar for the Michigan Building Code. And yeah, just a building code seminar.
Yeah.
So if you're saying Nerdfest and building codes in the same breath, how dare you, sir? Because I mean, it's building codes.
You have this weird thing. I think we talked about this on a previous episode recently. Even please fact check this. But you like continuing education. You like doing as much as possible. You do as much as is needed for maybe 5 people for their continuing education requirements, not just one person.
I was sitting next to someone and they're just like, I can't believe how far behind I am on my CEUs. And I'm thinking to myself, I can't believe that I'm actually here because I don't need them. I mean, I need 20. I need 24 for the state of Florida, 24 for the state of Maryland. I need 20. Is it 20 or 18 for AIA?
I think it's 18.
I think I have all of them granted, it's the same 24 for each state, except for Maryland or Florida actually requires a couple of extras, and we've talked about that.
Hmm.
I think I actually have enough CEUs to give them their own without doubling up. I
Wow. Oh, it's
I'm at
ridiculous.
actually before I went to that one. And truth be told, that I've actually already done 2 other CEUs since then. This was a 6-hour CEU. And before I went, I had 48.
Wow.
So I really
You're
don't
getting
need
there.
anymore.
Yeah,
And
you don't need it anymore.
and to be quite honest with you, okay, so Nerdfest,
But that's not why
yes,
you went. That's not why you
but
went, right?
it's not why I went. It's not why I went. It's 2 reasons why I went. One, actually, it was a really interesting topic. Funny enough, I know everybody. I told somebody that I was going, and they're like, I don't know if I could stay awake. The guy was engaging. He actually made, as weird as this sounds, he actually made building codes and talking about building codes and talking about kind of like weird ways of doing like mixed use buildings and stuff, which is stuff that we do all the time. I mean, I don't
Hmm.
think that there's a single building I've done in the last, I don't know, decade, 2 decades that hasn't been a mixed use building. I don't think that I've done a single use building. Even when you're doing education, it's still a mixed use because there's certain occupancies within that one that require you to do mixed use. And so
I'm always a
he
little
made it
confused by the term
interesting.
mixed use because mixed use to me is like, and it's correct, but I think of it as a typology, and I don't think of it as like a code thing. I think of it as, there's retail on the bottom and
Yeah.
there's living, there's residential above, or there's parking garage down below. And so mixed occupancy is how
Well,
I've always
there,
talked about this. So,
yeah. So yeah, I mean, mixed occupancy, mixed use is sort of interchangeable. I mean,
okay.
mixed use, to be quite honest with you, in the zoning world is exactly what you just said. Um, I guess we get lazy and say, instead of saying mixed use occupancy, we
Okay.
just say mixed use.
All right.
And
Thank you for straightening that up.
because I mean, it's hard to actually add the word occupancy on the
Yeah,
end
that's a
of.
hard
I
one.
mean, I've already like
Yeah.
exhausted my breath over mixed in use.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna
Yeah.
say occupancy,
God,
but
good job.
uh, but what was interesting about it? So like we went. So the first half of the day was, yes, Nerdfest out here, but the first half of the day was about the rehabilitation code. Essentially renovations, additions, things like that to an existing building, and that was interesting because I do a lot of that. In fact, it seems like the last decade and a half of my career, if not 2 full decades of my career, has been a lot of adaptive reuse. And so it's interesting to kind of go and sit down and go through the code in a way to almost make sure that I'm doing it right. In a way, it's
Yeah.
am
Sure.
have I been. And what was interesting is, so when we were doing the mixed use occupancy half of the day, he wanted to go through a portion of the code that was dealing with control areas. And he started talking about like control areas. And if for those of you who don't know what control areas are, it's just a way to compartmentalize your building that may have a higher hazard and separating it from a lower hazard, whether it be from, chemicals or other higher hazard, situations, and be able to like do a mixed use building and still have like these higher hazard occupancies within that building. And so do a lot of lab buildings. So we're obviously going to be doing things that deal with a lot of control areas and things like that. So
Hmm.
one of the things that he was talking about, he was going through the code, and he was talking about like, the horizontal separation of control areas, and talking about, egress and separations and things like that. And then he started talking about the vertical separations, and he was talking about what the code allows. And he started going through, he's just like, at 1 to 3 floor. You can have 2 control areas at 50% each to get your, full 100% occupancy of those, and, so on and so forth. But as you descend or ascend upwards within a building, it starts to reduce the percentage of chemicals and area that you can have up above. So that's all well and good. And so he gets to a point where he's like, well, you can do all of this, but who would really do that? It's like, it just doesn't make any sense to do that.
And you're
I'm
like,
sitting here,
you do that
I
thing where you're
slowly start to raise my hand.
like,
Yeah. I slowly start to raise my hand, and I'm like, yeah. Like, literally, the chart that you're using is a section through my building. There's a certain allowable to, it's like 9 floors and above. I'm like, well, I got a 12-story lab building. And then he's just like, and you've got certain ones where you can go below grade, your basement at 1 level, your basement 2 level, and then you're not allowed at basement 3. And he goes, but it's such an unlikely situation. And I'm like, well, guess what? I am living the unlikely situation, because every single solitary bit of information that you're passing on is embodied in this one project. And I ended up, because I had my computer with me and just so happened to have Revit open, and just so happened to have that building open, because that's the last thing I was doing before I left to go to my Nerd Fest.
You are the nerd at the Nerd Fest. You are the nerd at the Nerd Fest. Yeah,
I am the nerd. I was the nerd at the Nerd Fest. So I during our lunch, actually during one of our breaks, and everybody kind of like just took off to like make their phone calls or whatever, and I kind of like walked up to him, and I spun it around, and I brought up my code review sheets, and I showed it to him, and I was showing all of these things, and subsequently I've like emailed him to just tell him, thanks for the seminar. It was a really good information. I happen to be the guy that came up to you and showed you that. And he actually like praised me he was like, that was an amazing code review sheet. He's like, I love the section that you showed of your building and how the control areas were overlaid onto that, so that the reviewer could clearly understand like what you were trying to achieve and all of your separations. He was like ranting and raving about it. And I'm like, it was one of the first times that I've ever done that type of building with those type of constraints and stuff. It was 100% guess. I mean, we did have a code.
It got approved, right?
I mean, obviously it got approved, it got reviewed and everything else. It was just like at the time, because I hadn't ever done that. I'd never dealt with that kind of stuff before to that level, to that degree. I mean, it literally was. So we had business occupancy with A3, A2, S1, S2. So, the storage, assembly, business, industrial. Like
wow.
There was 5
yeah.
Was that 5? Yeah.
No,
nope, 6. 6 different occupancies. Yeah. 6 different occupancies, and like multiple different hazards, buildings that are going to definitely have, tons of chemicals in them and everything else. And it was just, as he's like telling everybody, don't worry about it. You're never really going to have to deal with anything like this. Like, you're not, but I am.
I think one of the interesting things about what you were just saying is how you communicate that to the permitting agency, right? And so you talked about showing those zones in section, and this reminds me of that meme that's been going around of that somebody posted that says, here's what my parents think I do as an architect, and they're showing, beautiful design and swoopy buildings and just amazing architecture, and then there's what she's actually doing, and she's typing into Google, how far away from the wall does a toilet go, and I mean that's what it's like. It just kind of speaks to the type of work that you're talking about, which is the nitty gritty technical work that you have to do to get the set of drawings approved for construction. And beyond just having all of the stuff in there, the requirements are all met. is communicating, because you're not communicating this just for, for fun. You're communicating it for the
Right.
contractor to build it correctly, to actually protect the people who are
Yeah.
going to use the building
Yes.
in the right, making sure that you have these separations in place and that it's all spelled out and it's specified, but also to the code reviewer to say, no, like, here are the
Yeah.
separations, here's how we did it, and here's how it's going to get built,
Yeah.
so that they can just say, yep, check, 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 because that is not an
And
easy process.
yeah. And sitting down and also convincing, like, say, going for the fire marshal and talking to the fire marshal and talking about, here's the way that here are all of the accessible routes that if you, heaven forbid, have to deal with the fire within
Right.
this building, here are all of your protected routes to be able to move safely throughout this building and things like that. And, and it's one of those things that people don't, uh, nobody really thinks that that's something that an architect does.
Right.
And so, they don't really, they think, oh, well, you're just drawing all of the, the pretty pictures and everything else. And, it leaves it up to somebody else to do all of this other stuff.
Right.
And I'll give you a good example of kind of like this, the misconception of what people think architects do and don't do and how they assist and work with, like, say, their engineers and everybody else. Was on a call today for this very building, because it is under construction. And I think I talked with you on a previous episode about how we are now revising a lot of the interior planning because we had designed it
Right.
with the intention of it being a generic lab building because we didn't have the user groups at the time. Now we have the user groups. And there is a really big portion of this building that's actually already constructed that has to be deconstructed to accommodate some
Mm-hmm.
of their things.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's trying to be as very kind of like understanding about their process and really knowing is like, how do you work? How do you actually do your job so that we can help shape the building to accommodate your, what you do, what you do. And, but, when we're listening to all of that, we have to then take all of that information, run an analysis and say, all right, well, it was designed for this. And we sort of have all of the infrastructure in for this, but you don't need half of that. You need something completely different that's going to require different supply and return and all of this other stuff. And they're like, yeah, okay, so we'll do that. We'll do an analysis of it. And when they think that they tell you what they need, their assumption is that that's what they're going to get.
Mm-hmm.
And, we come back to them today and we're having this conversation with them and telling them what the building can give them. It's just like, well, I don't understand. Why can't I have, this thing that I need? And you just think, well, because of how you've now set up all of your spaces, you went from kind of like generic fume hoods and things like that to now there are these rig rooms with air tables and all of these other things. And because you've compartmentalized them, now you went from one open room to 4 little closed rooms. They now have a completely different requirement for air distribution.
Mm-hmm.
So that means more ductwork up there. And like, well, why can't I have this and this? It's just like, because of this being an existing building and because of all of the constraints that we have with the existing structure and, like, unless you want like a 6-foot high ceiling, we can't fit all of this stuff in there. We can only it's kind of like one or the other, not both.
Right.
And it was a really hard conversation to have with them to let them know that you can't actually have both because, and they're like, but I need them for the way that I work.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, but the building can't give that to you. It's just like, well, we're only asking you to move it from here to here. I understand that on paper and
Yeah.
you
Sounds
gotta
like no
kind
big
of
deal,
like
but it is. Yeah.
they were exactly, they were looking, it's just like, I'm looking at it on paper and it's just really moving it from here to here. And they're not like, and I had to like stop and kind of explain that, what you see like is like, let's just say like, they were asking for this thing called a scavenger arm. And it's, it's a piece of equipment on kind of like a boom, like I've got, my microphone on. And they see that part of it. But there's so much more that's attached to it. There's so much more that runs off the wall. There's so much more that goes up above the ceiling and hard ducts into everything and all of this other stuff. And so, but they don't realize that, yeah, they see this and it should be easy for this to be moved down the wall, but you still don't have the space above the ceiling to accommodate all of the things that makes this little thing here work.
Yeah.
And they're just, but I don't get it. I mean, again, it's just, it's just moving it down the wall. Can't we just extend it more? Like, you don't have the physical space. There's like literally like, if you said you have a 5-passenger vehicle, but you want to fit 12 people in there, you can't.
There's another
like,
analogy. There's the
10
10 pounds of crap in a 5-pound bag, right? It's like you just don't have, and that stuff is not visible on the surface. And I'm sure they're even thinking like, but we can do whatever we want. We have the money to do whatever we want. We can make this change.
Yes.
But they're not thinking through all of the different repercussions of what's involved in making that solution happen.
I had the conversation with the owner's rep, the top of the pyramid, and they were like, if we had to do this all over again with the money that we're spending on this building, it would have been a new building, and we wouldn't have had to deal with the 12-foot floor to floor heights and the deep beams and all of these other things and all of this weird little dissection that we had to do to the existing building and the new building and and all of these other things of how to like mesh it all together. And even though we are making it work, is it exactly like, I mean, it's still, I would say that it is the best, it is the finest used vehicle we could have. I don't know. I'm trying to think. I was trying to think of what's a good analogy to say. It's like, it is like it's the nicest used car that you've ever seen,
Yeah.
Like,
it's like a resto mod in the car world, right? It's like you use the bones of the thing, very much, but you completely reskinned it, new engine, new everything, except for,
except for the only
just
thing,
the main structure.
So exactly, I was going to say, except for the only thing in like a resto mod is a lot of times they'll replace the entire frame, so it'll be this brand new like lightweight, frame and all of these other things that can take on all sorts of like weight, and torque and all of this other stuff. We got a 1962 concrete and steel building that has really, really low floor to floor heights, and the air conditioning wasn't like main like duct trunks and all this other stuff running through there. They were essentially glorified window units.
Yeah.
Well, it was just a dual duct system, and it was all these just ridiculous. It was the thing that I've learned, and I know you probably have too, and I know that plenty of other people who are listening have dealt with this. But the thing that I've learned that is like increased my knowledge of construction is all of the bad construction that I've had to deal with over the course of my career, of having to undo something that should have never been done, but it was the way that they did it.
Mm-hmm.
It was just and so to like learn by trying to renovate buildings has taught me so much more about like both new construction and renovation construction, from just looking at it. It's just like, why would they have ever done that?
So what is the conversation in the beginning? If you, I mean, obviously you can't do it all over again, but you alluded to what that conversation might be like. But the question that I guess I have is, why didn't it happen in the beginning? Why wasn't the conversation in the beginning? Like, because, everybody who's probably involved in that situation is enticed by the quote unquote savings of reusing the tower that they had, because obviously budget's always an issue with architecture, right? And so there's other constraints too, like proximity and, where they wanted to be, for their offices and their labs and all those things. But somebody with the experience that you're talking about having now has got to be at the table to say, like, there are serious trade-offs. And I think we've even talked about this in the past. The people who are going to be there at the end might not even have been the people who were there in the beginning making those decisions. Like, you're talking even about making major changes to lab spaces because it was COVID and nobody knew what they wanted. They didn't even have the staff, et cetera, et cetera. And now everyone is beholden to the decisions that were made before they even got there. And they're like, this sucks, right?
Yeah.
What do you how would you do it differently next time? Because those trade-offs that you're talking about people having to deal with now has got to be so disappointing. And they're going to have to spend the next 20 years there or whatever the period is, maybe longer.
Okay. So can I do a little bit of show and tell?
Yeah. Yeah. Go for
Because
it.
I can kind of show it's really sort of hard to explain some of the rationale of this building, and one of the the reasons why we did what we did without really sort of showing you like what some of the constraints were.
Mm.
And so on screen you can now see the Johns Hopkins Hospital complex.
Mm-hmm.
This area here is one of the original buildings called Billings Hall, and you can kind of see like these little U-shaped or little L-shaped buildings that kind of created the original. So you can, if you can see in this picture, a tower crane right there. So I would like to tell you that the decisions were made because of the constraints of things. There was a building right here where this tower crane sort of sits. You can kind of see this blank hole here.
Mm-hmm.
There is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 buildings,
Mm-hmm.
all surrounding and touching our building. And even more so is there is a series of utility tunnels underneath here. And I don't know how I get the short straw, blessed, whatever you want to call it, that actually, I mean, really, there's like, I don't know how or what you really want to call this, but somehow, some way, I always get stuck with having to build over the top of these projects that have all of the site-wide utilities, not just for the building, but site-wide utilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so then here is the actual, as you can kind of like see and spin around and everything, you can sort of see the constraints of the actual building. And so like you can see all of these other buildings squeezed in and around it. We are touching a lot in this, and it was a decision not necessarily made on economics. It was more about logistics. Also, the fact that there are multiple buildings that are still occupied while we're doing the construction.
Mm.
So, there's unoccupied. You can sort of see like all of the green board going up on this, building in the background. That's the south wing of this. This is the west wing. It's their core, and then our north wing will be in this particular one. It's actually there, but in this particular view, it's not there. But I mean, so it's this kind of like weird T-shaped building that, fits into all sorts of different things. And so honestly, because of the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, because of this podium, it's sitting on the central circulation system, pedestrian circulation throughout the hospital core. And so there's like, it's called the main loop that like loops around all of the different buildings and everything else. And so it's pretty complex. I mean, there's a lot of different rationales and reason behind it. And you'd say, well, at the end of the day, it would have saved a lot more money if we would have just like leveled this and started over. Well, that's not really the case, because then they wouldn't have been able to get the amount of like square footage into this building, because we would have had to have conformed to the new zoning code rather than because this is an existing building and we're doing a adaptive reuse to it. We're able to like keep the floor to floor heights, and I mean we're allowed to keep the number of stories we have. If we were to demo it and start over, to get the needed like say 16 to 18 feet floor to floor for a high performance lab building, you wouldn't get as many floors in. And because technically the building already exceeds the overall zoning regulations for the area, but because we're grandfathered in because of its existing nature and the existing building, we can go as high as like this adjacent building, which is the highest point on the campus. So sure enough, we are is exactly as high as that. And so, I mean, there's just a lot of constraints to there's a main arterial road that goes through the city, and it's just, there's just a lot to the decision behind why we did that. If it was possible to like do this all over again, I'm not sure how the powers that be would have approached this. They may have said this isn't the right place for this particular project. I mean, we've got
Right.
Other areas throughout the campus. Maybe we do it somewhere else. That kind of the situation. I mean, there's actually even like this little building right here, which is this is their actual office building, but right here is another building that which is the state of Maryland's, some lab buildings for the state of Maryland. It has the appropriate floor to floor heights. It is almost as tall as our building, but it has 5 less floors than we have. So that's kind of, behind there's again, there's the alchemy
One
of
of
like
those
all
trade-offs.
of the different, situation. Exactly. It was all of those trade-offs. So I just find it's easier to kind of, I'm one of these visual explainers. It's like, it's easier to like show you the craziness that was behind some of these things and why we made the decisions that we did. And was it because of the economics? A little bit. Was it because of the fact that they can actually get more people in this building? Yeah. I mean, because then that also comes back to economics, because this is a building that they are building, they being the, hospital, and they're leasing it to the school, the university. And so, there's the return on your investment for that. And there's all these other things. And we've already gone through the whole conversation about the politics of all of the different, shareholders and stakeholders in here. And so
It's just hard to
so much
explain
went into
those.
that.
It's hard to explain all that to people who come to the table much later in the process.
Yeah.
And it's like
then
you can't,
have
there
the
was
people.
no good answer, right? There was no good answer. And at some
Right.
point you have to make a decision, and that sets you on a path. And it's like, you kind of just want to say,
Exactly.
like, you can't ask questions about decisions we've already made because we can't go undo it. Like, there's no, like, yes, it might satisfy
Yeah.
you more if you knew the answer, but at the same time, like, you're totally wasting my time by having me explain this to you, and you're not going to be satisfied with the answer because we've already been down this for several years now. It's a tough business, and
Exactly.
it reminds me of when people say, what's the value of an architect, and how come architects are so bad at explaining their value? And it's like this kind of presentation, this kind of conversation right here shows the kind of work that, like, how much of that even happened before the project officially kicked off. Like, so much, right? Just to figure out the feasibility and the direction you were going to go, or what the options were and things like that. And again, I go back to this idea of like what people think architects do versus what they actually do. And the difference in like the aesthetics, the image of the building, and the technical aspects of feasibility, code, all of these different compartmentalization requirements, multiple use types in the same envelope, and all that stuff. It's just
Right.
insane. And most people can't even comprehend that. And at the same time, they're the ones saying, what do we need an architect for?
Exactly. I mean, and here's a project that literally has been a part of our lives for at least 8 years so
Wow.
far.
Wow.
Um, Even a little bit more for certain aspects of it to help them with the decisions. Like we were
Mhm.
involved early on with the decisions of, do we even entertain using this building before we even like release you to do a scope study to determine what we could use this building for and what are, some of the best practices. I mean, it's been kicked around. Should it just be medical office buildings? Should it just be this? Should it be that? Hey, we want to increase the presence of the school of medicine on the
Mhm.
hospital campus. What is the best way to do that? And all of these decisions, we've been a part of every one of those decisions for, the better part of almost a decade. Um, and when we're done with it, it will be 2026 when we're completely finished with this. There will have been people who are still on this project that have worked on this project for a decade.
Yep.
Fathom that for a while.
Like, yeah, it's tough.
That is yeah, yeah, exactly. So uh so what do architects do? A lot.
Yeah, we go back to this idea of the nerd conference that you went to, and the idea of getting better at what you do, and going to those kinds
Yeah.
of events and sharing experiences with other architects. Like
Mhm.
the guy who was giving the presentation said, you'll probably never have to deal with this, and then you're raising your hand and you're saying, look, like I deal with this all the
You're like,
time, and there's other people in the room who
yeah,
have never dealt with it. They know they're going to have to, and there's the whole spectrum, right? And I think it's super interesting
right.
to kind of think about the difficulties, the challenges, the that you're saying, yep, we're up for that, the time commitment
Yeah.
involved in doing it, and working with the clients and all of the everybody who's a stakeholder in this kind of a project. Like that to me is exhausting. And you're also going to a conference and saying,
Yeah.
yeah, I want to get better at this. We want to share our
Yeah.
experiences. We want to learn more, because this is a profession where you actually never stop learning. You never can stop getting better at your job. I would hope. I mean, that's the kind
Right.
of thing
Right.
that is also going on in the professionals in
Y-
architecture.
Yeah. And that honestly is, if you want to call it, I think you call it the obsession with, CEUs. It's really just trying to stay in tap with what like what am I going to be dealing with on the next project? I mean, what are the things that are out a few years ago, or I don't know, a few codes ago, when we started to change from requiring, continuous insulation? Well, what does that mean? Like,
Right.
like, we used to have thermal breaks all over the place and all of
Right.
this other stuff. How do you achieve that? And it's just like, because I'd never experienced it before, I had to figure it, I had to like either A, figure it out, or go to the experts who had figured it out and sit down and listen to them. And that's the kind of like knowledge sharing that we need in the profession, is to be able to like openly and freely exchange the conversation about, okay, well, how did you achieve?
Hmm.
Like when we see these, kind of like really cool designs, and we want to sit down and ask the architect who designed that, hey, how did you like create that detail? And a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't want to hold it close to the chest and say, I don't want to, give you that information, because that's like a staple of design. It's just like, well, how, like, everybody wants design to get better. Everybody wants like the tectonics of things to get better, the performance and all of this other stuff. We want to build lasting buildings. We don't want them to be these, how long is your warranty? 30 years? Well, that's all you have to worry about this building being around for. We want to actually, I mean, the buildings that surround this particular project are, well over 100 plus years old. And we want to attain the legacy. We want to make sure that the buildings that we're putting around it are going to last as long as it. And the only way to do that is to kind of like share our knowledge, um, and And so, yeah, I mean,
Hmm.
that's why I go to my nerd fests.
Cool, man. I appreciate you sharing all that because I think like I would ask the question up front and not really expect an in-depth answer. Like, why would you go to something like that? And obviously there's people who have been to these and they understand the value in those kinds of things. But then there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who haven't gone to these. And we've talked about the value of the AIA
Right.
conference as an example, which is very different from the workshop that you went to, right? But there are elements of it
Right. Right.
that are like the thing that you went to. And it is a reason why a lot of people go to the national conference to get their CEs and things like that as well. But it is worth sharing why these kinds of pieces of the profession, the continuing education parts of it are important and the kinds of experiences that
Yeah.
you can have at those, learning or otherwise. You know, if you're absorbing, if you're giving back to the crowd
Dude.
at
Yeah.
large and helping them progress as architects too, I think these are all valid reasons for going. And so it was cool to hear
Right.
your experience with that.
And you just wanted to pick on me and call me a nerd.
Mission accomplished.
Accomplished and appreciated.
All right, are we done for this one?
Yeah.
Cool.
I believe we are.